guest today is Jackie Parker, with whom we go back longer than I'd like to say.
Yeah, it's been a few years since you first presented me in a recital.
The reason I wanted to talk to you today in particular is because Fanny Waterman died on December the 20th. And we have a whole story going back to the Leeds competition. However, before you played for us, after you won the Leeds, which was in January of 1985, you played that concert of concerts at the Arts Club. Do you remember
Yes.
that?
Oh, I remember very well. I remember. Well, I remember one thing that was on the program was the Schumann Fantasy, which in the program was listed somewhat unusually with a German title like Dichtung or something. It had a different listing in the program, but it's generally known as the Schumann Fantasy. It's a 30-minute work. It's extremely difficult, not just technically, but even more artistically and emotionally. It's a difficult work. And it was basically the first major work that I was studying with Adele Marcus at Juilliard. And I had fairly recently moved to New York. So I remember that I was terrified to play that recital. Yeah, because I was very young. I was relatively inexperienced, and I had gone off to the big city and the big school, and now I was coming back to play a recital in my hometown, and I just had this. I had it in my head that the level of critical attention in a bad way was just, I was so nervous. But I remember, I remember the Schumann, because that piece had so much emotional meaning for me. And I remembered feeling that it had gone well, and that helped a lot.
For me, that concert was what I call a baptism by fire. So the other piece on the program was by David Gordon Duke.
Oh, of course, I played, yes.
And that's how I first met David. And we have become really, really close over the years.
Yeah, it was the Sonatina. And
yes,
that was a very, very special thing to have that piece. And I played it a lot in those days. He was the first Canadian composer that I championed.
That was the concert at the Arts Club. And I had no idea that your parents, because in those days it was general admission, and we just sort of had, I think, admit one ticket. And I didn't think that your parents were the ultimate ticket selling machines. And they kept asking for more tickets, and I just kept sending them more tickets. And when I arrived at the theater ahead of you, there were two things that had happened. One is there was already a lineup around the Arts Club. And secondly, the stage manager had decided that the stage looked messy. So he painted it with black paint. And they couldn't, do you remember? They couldn't put this piano on the stage.
Yes, there was some big problem.
The stage was wet. And the stage manager walked around with a hairdryer trying to dry the stage. And you were as cool as anything. I was just stunned. You sat warming up on the loading dock, and the piano hadn't even been tuned because it couldn't be put on the stage. And then eventually it got put on the stage. And then the doors opened and the people started pouring in. And then there was still about 150 people left outside, and the place was full. And when I heard a man in the line saying, "I don't understand. I bought my ticket 3 weeks ago, and now why can't I get in?" At that point, I just ran and hid under Bill Millard's desk because I didn't know what to do. And then Bruce McCall, the late Bruce McCall, who was one of my board members, came and grabbed me. He said, "You can't shirk your responsibilities. Come on." So we had to put seats on the stage.
I do remember all of that. And it was, uh, I had just enough elbow room to play like this and not hit somebody. And yeah, and that was about it. No, it was an incredible experience for so many reasons. And I have always had the ability, almost always, occasionally not, but I've almost always had the ability to look very calm and collected when actually inside I'm really, really worried. And I think all performers handle nerves in different ways, and many people are shocked to discover that I'm ever nervous. But sometimes the best thing I can do when I'm nervous is to sort of channel some kind of inner actor that I'm going to look like I'm not nervous, and that calms me down, actually. So. Yeah, there were a lot of unprecedented things that happened at that recital. Now you're mentioning that, it's all kind of coming back.
The sort of major concert you did with us was right after you won Leeds. So it was the very day that you won the Leeds competition. And I was in the car going home after I'd been at a performance, maybe it was the ballet, and I was driving up Richard Street in Vancouver, and your dad phoned me to tell me you'd won. And I decided, okay, I'm going to do something really extraordinary. We're going to rent the Orpheum and we're going to do a concert with you. I mean, we'd never thought about the Orpheum or doing anything big ever. And I remember I made those stupid little bumper stickers called Parker Leads the
Parker
Way.
leads the way.
Yeah.
Yes, I remember what they looked like. I remembered how much I hated that photo when I had it taken, but still, I remember I remember the bumper sticker well. I'm sure my mother still has one kicking around somewhere.
So that sort of led me to want to talk to you about, well, first of all, Fanny Waterman. So when you played that concert, we brought Fanny Waterman and her husband to Vancouver. And I think she gave a couple of master classes at the Academy of Music.
Mhm.
And we had a potluck board supper with her. And I mean, she really was she was right to the end, like the Energizer Bunny.
Yeah, she was an astounding woman. I mean, among the many remarkable stories about her starting the Leeds competition was the fact that when she started putting together some friends and advisors to eventually become her first board, uh, several of them said to her, well, you know, an international piano competition is a very bold thing to start, but certainly you're going to have to do it in London. I mean, that's the center of everything cultural in the UK. And she was adamant that it was going to be in Leeds, that was her city, that was her place. She knew all the people. She knew that she'd have the support of the university in terms of practice pianos, and she knew that she was going to have a network of private homes to host the artists. I mean, she knew that that was the place it had to be. And once she made that clear and people started to rally around her, I mean, it really became a competition that has always stood for artistry more than it has stood for you know, displays of virtuosity. Although, you know, I would argue that a display of virtuosity is an important part of being an artist, but it just shouldn't be the only part. And so I think Fanny Waterman set that tone early, and she always, you know, just in her choice of jury, her general demeanor about the competition. You know, there was a certain very comfortable family feeling about it too. I remember the day after the competition when I was still in a bit of a state of shock. I mean, I had no expectation that I was going to win when I entered. I didn't enter like you would enter the Olympics, you know,
Yeah.
striving for gold. I really didn't. I just thought, I remember entering Leeds and thinking, okay, if by some bizarre miracle I get to the finals, I'm going to be able to play the Brahms First Piano Concerto with orchestra for the first time and maybe the only time in my life. That was my only motivating thing. Was it would be so great to play Brahms 1 with an orchestra. But the day after the competition, Dame Fanny and Jeffrey had us over to their house. Was very relaxed. You know, we had a nice meal. We just sort of chatted. I mean, she really wanted to sort of get to know me. And yeah, it was it was remarkable. Now you probably know or remember the story about what happened in the finals ceremony.
Yeah, you have to tell us.
So we had the Duchess of Kent as the member of the royal family who was officially being the royal presence at Leeds. And, you know, that's a huge, huge deal in the UK if you rate having royal presence. So the Duchess of Kent is there, and Fanny Waterman was on stage. And, you know, this clip is taken out of context all the time where she says, well, you don't have to be Sherlock Holmes to know who won first, you know, the gold medal. Jon Kimura Parker. And it's totally out of context because there were 6 finalists and she had already announced 6th, 5th, 4th, 3rd, and 2nd. So in fact, it was at that point, you know, everybody knew. And so she announces it, and I went over and kind of shook her hand. And then I went over to the Duchess of Kent, who literally leaned over and basically invited me to kiss her on the cheek, which I did, and which, you know, was reciprocated. But the live BBC television feed did not show her leaning over. It just cut to the kiss. So this created reverberating waves on BBC television. Richard Baker, the esteemed BBC announcer, was saying, and Mr. Parker has accepted the, oh dear. You know, and then went off on what he was talking about. And the next day, when I was at Fanny and Jeffrey's house having lunch, the newspapers started showing up, and the London Times and all the, you know, regular papers had articles about the competition and the winners and the repertoire and reviews of the performances and all the serious stuff. And then all the rags, the Daily Mirror and the Telegram and all that kind of stuff, had photos of me kissing the Duchess. And one of them, the headline was "Cheeky Canadian Pianist Breaks Royal Protocol." Another one was "Brahms and Kissed," which was a takeoff on Cockney rhyming slang, and on it went. And so I had all this notoriety that I completely didn't deserve. And it lasted long enough that, and so this was in early fall of 1984, I was immediately invited by the Toronto Symphony to perform with them in a concert for Queen Elizabeth and Prince Philip, who were on an official visit to Canada, their first in a while. And there was a royal receiving line, and we were coached that when we meet the Queen, you don't try to shake her hand until she's offered her hand, and she's to be addressed as Your Majesty, and Prince Philip is to be addressed as Your Royal Highness. And, you know, it's great, by the way, watching The Crown, you know, and thinking, oh my God, I actually did really meet her and him, you know. There they are, and I'm suddenly standing in a dressing room in Roy Thomson Hall in Toronto in front of the Queen of England and Prince Philip, and she holds out her hand, and I go to shake her hand, and a wall of photographers started taking pictures, and flash bulbs were going off because they thought I was going to try to kiss the Queen.
Oh.
and of course I didn't do that. And I was, you know, I said, you know, I'm so pleased to meet you, Your Majesty. And Queen Elizabeth says, congratulations on your recent success in England, in Leeds. And I was blown away that she knew that. And I said, well, thank you so much. It was such an honor for me. And Prince Philip says, well, I heard there was a bit of a tiff with the Duchess. Do tell. And so I was explaining to them, I'm explaining to the Queen of England that it was more or less a royal command that the Duchess of Kent, that I ended up kissing her on the cheek. Queen Elizabeth's last words to me were, well, she does like to get people in trouble. And then off they went, you know, and I still can't believe that conversation even happened.
So Jackie, what I want to ask you is, while you were there and playing in the rounds and so on, how did you feel? Were you nervous? Were you tense? And how do you look upon running the Honens now with the experience that you had in going to Leeds?
Well, that's a great question, because taking on the artistic directorship of Honens, frankly, taking on the artistic directorship of anything was not something I've ever been dying to do. But when the people at Honens made it clear that they really did want me to take that position, I realized that I have experienced piano competitions from pretty much every possible angle. I competed in and actually managed to win in Leeds and a few smaller competitions. And I've coached my students many times for competitions. I've now been on multiple juries for competitions, including Clyburn, for example. So I have an idea of what it's like from every angle. I can tell you certain things. I mean, at the last Honens competition, I did feel, frankly, I was amazed. I thought all 10 of the semifinalists who came to the last Honens they seemed so calm and collected and so much more mature than I felt that I was as a 24-year-old in Leeds. And I remember a lot of funny things that happened. I remember for the first round, where in those days, we had specific repertoire. You had to play a certain work by Chopin and a certain etude and all that. And many of the competitors started with their etudes because I think they wanted to show right away that they had the technique to rate, And I decided to start with the Chopin Fourth Balad, which is a piece that people usually end with because it has a big, serious, flashy ending. But I started with it because it starts really softly. It starts like a flower unfolding, And I wanted this idea that the first sound that I made would be a really beautiful sound and that things would grow out of it. And then after that, I played Mozart and thing, it was just a totally different way to do the program. But when I got to the next round, the semifinal round, my big piece was the Brahms Handel variations. And I was backstage minutes before going on stage, and I was practicing, and I got stuck in one of the variations and had a completely disastrous memory slip. And I forgot where I was, and I had to stop. And I panicked, and I pulled up my music, and I was starting to flip through the pages to find the music and to see what had happened. And at that point, Jeffrey, who was volunteering, Fanny's husband, who was volunteering backstage, knocked on my door and came in and says, they're ready for you. And I started the Brahms, and I thought, if I think too much, which is the mistake that musicians often make. Sometimes it's not a mistake, it just happens. You just get so hyper-focused, and you start thinking in a way that you're not used to thinking when you're practicing. And I said, if I do that, I'm sunk. So when that variation approached, I actually figured out how to turn my brain off. And I played through the next maybe 3 or 4 variations totally on automatic pilot. Probably not terribly musically, but I just had to get through it without thinking. And once I got past it, I thought, okay, and I kind of re-engaged to be back in thinking, well, actually musically, what do I want to do? And I got through the rest of it, and everything was fine. To me, it's incredibly exciting being part of an organization, and with Honens, and I have to say that I look to Leeds all the time and remember my experiences there. And everything that Dame Fanny Waterman had set up, everything that mattered to them, from just the simple hospitality things to access to good pianos, and all of that is part of what I'm trying to do at Honens, to keep something magical about the idea of a competition, about the idea of pianists from around the world converging in one place, getting to know a community, being adopted by the community. Every one of the 10 semifinalists feels totally embraced and loved by the city of Calgary during the whole competition. And that includes if they don't make it to the finals. They perform recitals for the community in various locations over the course of that week, and they are completely loved by everybody. It's great.
Competitions, are they good, or they also are viewed as bad by a lot of people?
Yeah, I think they're fantastic if they're done well. And I'll say this, and I don't know what this says about me, it's just a fact. That when I was a teenager and then into my 20s, I loved performing. But there were times when the act of practicing was a chore, and it was difficult to stay really on task and really focused. But every time I was preparing for a competition, I practiced harder. And that was really important to me in my 20s. It was important for my artistic development, my technical development, my ability to be reasonably consistent, and yet to have the comfort level that I could take risks, and know that I was basically all there. All of those things happened because I was preparing for competitions. It used to be reasonable to criticize competitions, and this is where in those days, and this is certainly before Honens, for example, but Leeds would be criticized less, I thought.
Yeah,
But
you're right.
that,
Yeah.
that competitions would be criticized for producing pianists who had just fantastically fast fingers and were very flashy and showy, and maybe there just wasn't enough depth to carry them beyond 1 or 2 seasons of concerts. I think a lot of it has to do with the philosophy of the competition. And the Honens was one of the very first competitions to say, your ability to choose a program is also part of the equation here. A competition should look at everything, you as a complete young artist, not as a virtuoso pianist where your whole life has been in a practice room.
Now, you as the director of a competition, when you put together a jury, because that's also a big job, you have to make sure that you have individuals who you think will get along together. And I mean, to what extent do you know when you ask somebody to join a jury what their expectations are going to be? I've been on a number of screening juries, Montreal competition a couple of times, Honens once.
Mm-hmm.
And when I'm on a jury with professional pianists or piano teachers, I look at the things completely in a different way than because that comes out afterwards in the comments. Ultimately, I think it's wonderful to win a competition. And then with the winning of the competition, you get a slew of engagements. But it's the re-invitations, it's the getting the second invitation. So that's telling me that it's either the audience or the presenter who is then going to help build the career of the artist.
I've thought about this for so long that, I mean, you can talk yourself in circles 100 times, because as an active performing musician, I am so inundated in detail. And that expression, you can lose the sight of the forest for the trees, is very, very important for pianists, for example, and for violinists, any musician, because we are doing an incredibly unbelievable act of physical coordination, detail-oriented tasks, hand-eye coordination, ear, hand-eye, soul coordination.
Yeah.
There's so much happening. The details matter, but that will never be by itself the performance that has the magic that you talk about, that has that compelling, I want to hear that person again. All of those details are in support of that. Certainly, I think that has some bearing on who is going to be on a jury at any given time. But Honens has always had for many years, has wanted to have not just professional pianists. Of course, professional pianists should be on the jury of a major international piano competition, but it isn't the only perspective that we're looking for, because a professional pianist, and a very sensitive one, will appreciate all of those details if they're all the way they should be. Will truly appreciate it. If it's a piece you've played and you know how hard it is to learn and you hear all that being done well, yes, of course, you appreciate that and you reward it in some way. But it's also important to have concert managers, to have concert presenters, to have conductors, to have a different, variety of people on the jury who are going to maybe not be so intimately familiar with that specific Beethoven sonata, but they know Beethoven, right? And so that's really important. The thing that happens when you're on a jury, and it doesn't really happen, and you know this because you've been on juries, it doesn't really work until you're actually in the act of being on the jury and listening is in a very certain kind of way and in a very specific way, you understand yourself better. You understand what matters to you. For me as a performer, the first couple of times I was on a jury, I was just blindsided by all these sort of epic realizations of what actually matters to me and what moves me.
Jackie, thank you so much. So when are you heading back to Rome?
Back to Houston, yeah. So I'm on Orcas Island at the moment. I came out here with my wife Aloysia in July, and we just haven't left here. I mean, this is I'm very close, of course, to Vancouver, right across the border, and I can actually see Vancouver from the top of Mount Constitution on Orcas. It's amazing. I can't so easily visit right now, which is incredibly frustrating, because I'd love to just drive up and see my mom, but
yes,
I've done mostly remote teaching, but I'm heading back in about a month. I'm gonna stick around. We're doing a concert here on Orcas, which we're gonna live stream, and we're gonna get through that, and then I'll head back to Houston, check in with my house there, make sure it's still standing, and hear my students in person, which will be great.
Jackie, thank you so much for your time.
It's been great. It's great to catch up with you.
And I look forward to talking to you more.
Absolutely.
Bless you. Take
care. Same
care.
to you. Okay, bye-bye.
Bye.